What's going on, guys? This is Rob, and we are back with the Dark Knights of Steel storyline. Now, there's a couple ways that we can handle this, because this is issue number 6, so it's technically the end of volume 1. So either we can just continue on doing these as they come out, adding them to the playlist and letting you guys stay followed up there, or we can wait until all 6 issues are done, which, barring no delays, will take about 6 months, and then go forward from there. So let me know which one you guys are interested in, and I'll also check the audience retention and analytics to see what people think as well, right? So having said that, as you guys know, with the Dark Knights of Steel, this is basically an Elseworld story in DC Comics, right? Just an alternate reality story that's really, really amazing. Now, what we end up doing here, and this is really, really cool, again, this is where roles are shifting, characters aren't who we traditionally expect them to be, is that we pick up with Zala Jor-El. Now, as you guys know, that's not who Supergirl traditionally is. That normally, Supergirl is Kara Zor-El. And so the fact that she's related to the Jor-Els is a pretty big deal, because what you have is this conversation where she basically comes home. Now, the last we saw her, there were a few things going on. One, she had basically attacked the Kingdom of Storms, right? So basically Jefferson Pierce, Black Lightning, as some of you guys know him. And between the death of his son and the death of him, that's basically led the House of Storms, or the Pierce's family, to war against the Elves. The other part of this, and really seemingly the reason why Supergirl is here, is to basically pay respects to the leader of the House of Elves. We end up finding out, of course, following his death, that she's basically his daughter. So in essence, Superman and Supergirl are brother and sister, as opposed to being cousins. So this is a really, it's a cool change, to be honest with you guys. And in truth, the more I think about this, the more I'm like, that kind of seems normal, right? But the crazy thing about this is that what goes on is basically Supergirl says that what she had been doing while she was out there is she had been hunting for the Green Man. Now, as we know, the Green Man is basically Lex Luthor / Joker / Green Lantern kind of combined together into a singular villain. So there's a lot of questions about what's going on, because the funny thing about this is we end up switching over to Harley Quinn. Now, one of the hallmarks of Harley Quinn's character, really in more recent years, has been her relationship with Poison Ivy. And it kind of made sense, right? Like literally when you had Gotham City Sirens and all that kind of stuff, that having like team-ups and different events that happened where you'd have Harley Quinn and Poison Ivy working together, whatever the case was, it always just worked well, right? They were kind of like the 1-2 punch of like female villains and things like that in DC Comics. So when DC was just kind of like, you know what, in for a penny, in for a pound, and then put them together as a romantic couple, it just worked. And it was really, really cool to see. I always thought it was fascinating. And so that's why Tom Taylor continues this on, because it has been for a while a very popular aspect of the characters of Harley Quinn and Poison Ivy. And so of course, when Harley shows up here, she's really sent as more of an emissary, and of course says like, essentially the queen of the House of Elves needs your help. Now, of course, the response of Poison Ivy, as you would expect, is, I recognize no queen, but I'll do whatever it is that you want, Harley Quinn. But it's one of those things where we're kind of given a bit of how discussions have unfolded on the back end, when she basically says, look, I'm not going to use my forest, right, to strictly protect the House of El, because the queen asks for it. But if you ask for it, I will give it to you. The only thing that I ask in return is that you live here with me. And when Harley Quinn's response is like, this again, like, and the response of Poison Ivy is like, this always, the romantic thing is kind of there. Now, one of the things that Tom Taylor sort of toys with and doesn't necessarily give us a definitive answer here is, of course, back during that point in time, having like relationships between people of the same sex was very much frowned upon. And so assuming that concept from the real world carries over into this comic, it's something that Harley Quinn wouldn't readily make aware to people that are out there. Only individuals who are of the highest order can do that and basically get away with it, largely because any kind of attack on those people would lose the will of the people themselves, or the favor of the people themselves, of like the greater governed society. Harley Quinn's a court jester. You kill her, nobody's gonna care. And so it's just one of those things where like they've largely seemed to have kept their relationship secret. But in the end, the response of Poison Ivy is, I will basically build an army for you and I will use my force in order to keep you safe. Now, the question that we would ask here is, what good could the forest of Poison Ivy possibly do against a veritable army that's super powered? Because it's different when you have like soldiers with like swords and shields that are making their way through there. But Tom Taylor answers this question immediately. And the best person he chooses to do this with is Wonder Woman, because literally she's flying overhead on her Pegasus with the intention of arriving at the House of Elves. And of course, as soon as that happens, Poison Ivy basically uses her force to snatch Wonder Woman down, bring her down to the surface, and then immediately like incapacitate her. Now, well, it doesn't really happen immediately. It's one of those things, it's kind of funny funny. Like Wonder Woman's just like stand aside. And the response of Poison Ivy's like, no. So literally Wonder Woman like kicks a tree in half, picks it up and goes to attack Poison Ivy with it. And Poison Ivy's like, my trees, right? So like literally things are popping off, right? Things are getting kind of nuts. But like Poison Ivy basically uses vines and ensnares Wonder Woman quite readily. And so that's when you kind of get just how capable Poison Ivy is. And it's good to see it continues on, because the truth about this is that if you're not overly familiar with DC Comics, Poison Ivy is somebody that you sleep on, right? You don't really realize just how capable she is and just how deadly she is. One, she's an elemental, so she belongs in the same vein of power as somebody like Swamp Thing, right? Being able to control the elements of the earth, or really the greenery of the earth, so trees and bushes and stuff like that. But it's one of those things where you get this kind of funny moment, because she literally tells Wonder Woman's like, you know, like, I'm not here for violence, but understand, I could destroy you if I wanted to. The response of Poison Ivy is amazing here, right? She's like, and I can command fungus to rot in your brain and thorns to seed in your eyeballs. I can make your life, I can make the ending of your life incredibly painful. I can stretch this out 2 weeks, right? It's nuts. It's one of those really, really cool things. So that's why I say Poison Ivy is incredibly capable. And so in the end, the response of Wonder Woman is basically that she is really here because she has more faith in Supergirl than Hippolyta does. That Hippolyta, of course, is taking the reports given to her about the attack on the House of Storms and is like, yep, that sounds like something the elves would do. To war! And then like that's basically it, right? That's really all it is. Whereas Wonder Woman's like, no, like I know Supergirl, we're romantically involved. There's a little more to her than this, so I have a hard time just arbitrarily accepting, yep, this sounds like something the elves would do, and then just being willing to go to war against them with the House of Storms. And so in the end, of course, Supergirl basically shows up and Wonder Woman's like, let's go have a conversation. And so that's when you get this really, really cool thing, because ultimately you end up having this statement by Wonder Woman who's like as far as our reports are given to us from the Kingdom of Storms, which again, they don't necessarily know that Jefferson Pierce is dead yet. They're like, you know, the king says that you killed his son. And she's like, what in the world are you even talking about? And that's where things get murky, because we seemingly saw her do it. And so the question is, if she's like, okay, what, like, I have no idea what you're talking about here. I didn't attack the king's son. I have no clue what you're referring to. Either one, she's a great liar. Two, she didn't actually do it. Or three, she did do it and doesn't remember it. So like, there's a few possibilities about what's going on. But in the end, of course, kind of pulling on their romantic relationship, right? Their closeness there, albeit a little more stoic than you would traditionally see with like Harley Quinn and Poison Ivy, where it's far more gushy, far more emotional, different things like that. That is kind of like, okay, we can't, like, we literally have to hold these kingdoms together, right? Like, we have to find some way to keep this war from happening. Like, it's literally the two of them who are like, we're the only ones that really stand between essentially a giant world war between the House of Elves and the Kingdom of Amazonia and the Kingdom of Storms. And so what we end up doing here is basically switching over to basically Batman presenting to Superman a piece of a fallen star, right? Basically a little meteorite shard that crashed into Earth. Of course, as we know, it's kryptonite. It's the piece of kryptonite that we had seen previously, and it's actually what led to Alfred revealing to Batman his true identity when Batman started to succumb to the effects of kryptonite. That he's the result of an affair between Jor-El and Martha Wayne, right? And it's just one of those super well-kept secrets, and that's one of the reasons why Jor-El was always so friendly towards Bruce and would always say things like, you're as much a part of this family as anybody else. And so that's where Bruce Wayne actually reveals the truth here to Superman, right? He's like, look, you know, Alfred was able to make some lead, or at least use some lead to basically encase this kryptonite, hence the reason why it's not really poisoning you and why it's not really affecting me. But in the end, I am like, I'm your brother, right? I'm the son of your father. And it's really, really interesting, because what this does is it creates a kind of closeness between the two of them that wasn't necessarily there before. Or at least you'd think it would, because literally Superman grabs a piece of kryptonite, strips off the metal, and then plunges it into the chest of Bruce Wayne, flies him into the sky, and is like, this world is ours to rule. There can be no challengers, and throws him down into the ground and then leaves. And it's just like, damn, son, Superman's a dick. Like, this is so cool. Like, as soon as that happened, I was like, wow, okay, so I guess Superman's a villain. Now, this is where things get really, really crazy, because at that point, you switch over to like this carriage with this older couple, and I know you guys already know what's happening, but it's a carriage with this older couple that end up basically, you know, riding to where it is that this thing just fell, right? And they're kind of like, I mean, I don't know exactly what it is, but like something fell over here. When they get there, of course, they find Batman with a piece of kryptonite in his chest, and then they in turn take the kryptonite out. And so when it's kind of like, I mean, what do we do? Like, what do we do here? The response is like, we take him to the palace. And that's when he wakes up and he's like, no, do not take me to the palace. Do not take me back there. And so ultimately, the guy who is identified as Jonathan, of course, the other one being Martha, so Jonathan and Martha Kent, that what they end up doing is basically bringing Batman, taking Batman under their wing back to the Kent farm. At this point, we switch over to basically the Kingdom of Storms, right, to John Constantine. Now remember, Constantine is kind of the catalyst behind all of this, that there was a prophecy that basically foretold the arrival of the Jor-Els, the fact that the Jor-Els would ultimately end up conquering the world. It would lead to the destruction of like the Kingdoms of Storms and Amazonia and all that kind of stuff. But as soon as, once people realized just how capable the Jor-Els were, and as they essentially took over, started ruling the kingdom and so on and so forth, following the death of the Waynes and whatnot, what this did is it really kind of created just an inherent ceasefire, because nobody knew for sure if the Jor-Els were going to end up living up to the prophecy. But as things have started to unfold, the words of the prophecy are seemingly ringing true. And so that's why Constantine's position is really more important now than it's ever been before. The other thing about this is, of course, you basically pick up with one of these guys showing up here, right? One of the teenagers showing up here, who's actually revealed to be Tim Drake, right? Him arriving here and speaking with John Constantine, that Constantine, of course, is struggling with the death of like the king, right? The death of Jefferson Pierce and so on and so forth. And in a lot of ways kind of sees himself as the fault of this, because he was the one who was supposed to protect the king and so on. But what he also reveals here is he knows that Tim Drake is one of Batman's Robins, that in reality here, the Robins of Batman are basically spies, or at least Tim Drake is, that he was sent here in order to keep an eye on the kingdom and report back to Batman, and that John Constantine figured that out incredibly fast. And that's why Tim Drake was assigned to Constantine, so Constantine could occasionally feed him false information and basically create a circumstance where Batman didn't know what was true or false. And so it would very much muddy the waters. That it's a much better idea than giving Batman straight lies, because then ultimately he could figure it out and say, okay, so the truth is most likely the opposite of what Tim Drake is telling me. But by muddying the waters and merging truth with fiction, it makes it very difficult to discern which one is which. And so ultimately, John Constantine switches his tune and is like, all bets are off. I'm done playing this game. So he literally casts Tim Drake out, right? It throws Tim Drake out of the room and into the hallway, where Tim Drake ends up meeting Princess Jennifer. Now remember, Princess Jennifer is one of the daughters of Jefferson Pierce. She's not the oldest. So technically the oldest daughter of Jefferson Pierce is actually having her coronation at the moment, or at least they're preparing for it. And so she's going to be the one that basically takes control of the throne of the Kingdom of Storms. But as soon as Tim Drake is thrown out in front of Jennifer, Jennifer's like, what in the world is going on? And the response of Constantine is, he's one of Batman's Robins, and that's all it takes. Because remember, Batman is part of the house, or the Kingdom of Els. And because Batman is associated with the Kingdom of Els, and so is Supergirl, and Supergirl is seemingly the one who killed both Jefferson Pierce and his oldest son, the rightful heir to the throne, the response of Jennifer is like, everybody from the Kingdom of Els are our mortal enemies. If we see them, we kill them. And that's exactly what she does with Tim Drake. She doesn't actually kill him, although it'd be crazy if she did, right? She just starts like electrocuting the hell out of him, going straight up like Emperor Palpatine. Like Tim Drake's all like Luke Skywalker begging like John Constantine to save his life, and Constantine goes all Darth Vader and is like, no, stop killing this kid. We can't go to the coronation of your sister with blood on your hands. And so ultimately Tim Drake is just banished, right? She gives him a reprieve, right? Literally, it's just like, you're banished from this place. Do not come back. If we see you, we will kill you. But do know that when you arrive back in the Kingdom of Els, tell them war is coming, that it is inevitable and it is unstoppable, and that there's nothing they can do to prevent our wrath. So as soon as Tim Drake shows up there, right, he literally just starts talking to the Kingdom of Els, and it's just like, I need to speak with Batman. But of course, he's basically told like, Batman's missing, and Alfred and the other Robins are out hunting for him, so you get to talk to us. And so the statement he makes here is, okay, I'm here to tell you that war with the Kingdom of Storms is coming. Jefferson Pierce has been killed, and the king of the Kingdom of Storms was killed by Zala Jor-El. Everybody's just kind of like, what are you even talking about? And so he literally just starts like just dishing the information, right? He says, I can tell you there was an attack at sea. Everyone I've spoken to on the ship had the same thing to say. And it's not as though it was just a general questioning. He's like, I gained trust, right? Like I bribed, I threatened, and the story was the exact same every single time. That if there was any inconsistency, right? If what I was being told was a false story, somebody somewhere would have cracked, but no one did. Which means either they all have the most incredible fortitude of anybody ever, or they're all telling the truth. And that if they all saw Zala Jor-El kill the king, right? If they all saw Zala Jor-El basically attack the king on that boat, right? And the king's statements that Zala Jor-El had basically killed his son. If any of this was a lie, then somebody would have revealed it. Therefore, it can't be, which means it seems true. Zala Jor-El killed the king. And so the funny thing is that his allegiances are a little questionable here. Perhaps because Tim Drake spent so much time among the Kingdom of Storms, but he's like, they're simply acting to protect their family, their people, and their entire world. They're living up to a prophecy, and the truth about this is they're acting in response to what they believe Zala Jor-El did. Now, the immediate response to that is, it doesn't matter, right? It's obviously a lie they made up. Zala Jor-El would never do that. Make sure you maintain your allegiances, right? Keep in mind who it is that you serve here. And so it's one of these things where it's like, there is a mystery here. There is truth in there somewhere, but no one seems interested in finding it. And no one's stopping to ask the question, is there anything else really going on here? So a wild little moment here is a conversation with the Queen. You have General Waller. Remember, Amanda Waller is the leader of the forces of the House or the Kingdom of El. And that when Amanda Waller is talking to the Queen, what Amanda Waller does is provide this very insightful statement here. The Queen says, I'd like to consider this alone, General Waller. And the response of Waller is, I understand, Your Majesty, but I just simply wanted to say that Diana was right. The Amazons will follow their queen into battle against us, right? That has always been that way. That the Kingdom of Amazonia has always been an ally of the Kingdom of Storms, and that's just how it is. Literally, they need no other reason than that, and they will not take any other reason than that. They've always been allies, they will always stay allies, and they will both go to war against us. She says, so I will simply leave you with this thought. I do not believe the love between Diana and Zala can be broken. If Hippolyta dies, Diana becomes the queen of the Amazons. And because Diana loves Supergirl so much, that will be our allegiance, right? That'll be our forge. It'll be the way in which we bring the Amazons to our side. And so it's a really, really interesting thing because it's like Supergirl can be the one to convince her. Now, the thing about this is that's a big gamble, right? We don't know, we have no idea how that would play out. It could very well be that the House of Els could organize the assassination of Hippolyta. And when Diana finds out, she would literally look at Supergirl and be like, you're just like all of them. And then war continues. Not only that, not only does war continue, that war would actually be worse because now the Amazons siding with the Kingdom of Storms isn't even based on just some old standing alliance. Now it's a personal vendetta, right? So it's just like, damn, any possibility of bringing them to their side is totally gone. And so that's where things get really, really crazy because at that point you switch over to Superman, who ends up having this kind of momentary conversation with Jimmy Olsen, right? Kind of the guy who keeps an eye out for everything. And he's like, is there any sign of Batman? He's like, no, we don't, we haven't seen him or anything like that. He's like, okay, then I got to take off because I'm going to try to find some way to stop all of this. And so what you end up doing is you switch over to John Constantine, basically creating a kind of diagram. And of course, he ends up summoning Etrigan. And that's the nuts thing because he's like, I don't want to talk to you, Etrigan. I want to talk to your host, right? Now, keep in mind, historically speaking, in DC Comics, Etrigan was always part of like the demonic side of things, right? So like, even when you focused on anything not your traditional superhero, basically Vertigo type stuff. So you had like Etrigan, Swamp Thing to a degree, John Constantine, Zatanna, right? All that stuff, right? All those magical beings that exist out there. That Etrigan was always a really, really cool concept, but one of the things I want you guys to notice is unlike the main DC universe, Etrigan's not rhyming. That Etrigan always rhymes whenever he talks. It's one of the things that's really entertaining, but can occasionally be annoying. And so when Etrigan ends up switching back over to his human form, he says, gone, gone, O Etrigan, rise again the form of man, which normally it's gone, gone the form of man, arise the demon Etrigan, right? And then just kind of switching back when it comes to his normal host, which is Jason Blood. The reason why I say his normal host is because the current host of Etrigan is actually Ra's al Ghul, which is an amazing concept. We don't know how that happened. We simply just know that it did. But what Ra's al Ghul was really summoned here for by John Constantine is that what Constantine is looking for is for Ra's al Ghul to use the powers of the Etrigan demon to actually resurrect both Jefferson Pierce and his son. Because the hope of doing this is that if it happens, war will be averted. Of course, ultimately he says, that's not something that I can necessarily do. His response is like, the heart of Jefferson Pierce is gone, right? There's no way for me to bring his heart back. There's no way for me to basically resurrect him because I can't create a heart out of nowhere and like put it in his body. He's like, however, when it comes to his son Jason, Jacob, that I can do. Like that I can resurrect him. The problem is he won't necessarily be the person that you remember him being if I bring him back. He could be completely evil, it could be completely terrible. Now what this seems to indicate here is that what Ra's al Ghul would do is take them to the Lazarus pits. That in taking them there, they would basically end up returning to life and then come back. Now that's the caveat, because where he says he may not necessarily be the same person that you recall, when it comes to the Lazarus pits, you're usually taken there and then you experience a momentary bout of insanity. When you come back, you lose your mind temporarily. Now you usually end up reverting back to your normal self, but that may not be the case here. That what may be the case is that the price you pay for basically being resurrected through the Lazarus pits is you permanently go insane. And so who knows what Jacob would end up being like if he was brought back. But the price that Ra's al Ghul asked for is basically the price of the Titans, right? The Teen Titans, or maybe it's just the Titans in general, like they're older, I'm not entirely sure. That what Constantine's been doing is actually keeping them hidden. Now we don't know exactly why it is that Ra's al Ghul wants the Titans, it's seemingly just that he does. And so we don't necessarily know if a bargain is actually struck between the two. We actually switch over to Superman arriving at the kingdom of Amazonia. Now as soon as he shows up there, he's attacked by all the Amazons, because no man, quote unquote, is allowed to set foot on Amazon itself, on Amazon property. Now of course, it's kind of a funny thing, because as they all start to attack with swords and all that kind of stuff, they all break on Superman, right? And literally he's just fending them all off, seemingly with the greatest of ease. And he's like, I don't want to fight any of you. And that's when Hippolyta shows up. And she's like, for a person who doesn't really want to fight, you know, you are doing a lot of fighting. And she's like, that's because your people attacked me. And she's like, well, no man is allowed to set foot on Amazonia. And he was like, I'm not actually standing on it. And so then like Lois Lane chimes up with this kind of funny moment where she's like, a technicality is really not in the spirit of the rule. Right? Like, it doesn't mean literally stepping foot on Amazonia. It means just don't come here, right? That's basically what the rule means. And so she's like, okay, you know, Hippolyta's like, okay, like you're looking for me, Kal-El, then you found me. And she just stabs him through the stomach with her sword. Now, of course, he doesn't die as you would expect, or at least as you might think he does. I mean, I didn't expect him to die. But the big question you have to ask here is, how was she able to stab him with a sword that was not made of kryptonite? The answer to this, which is really, really cool, is when Lois Lane shows up here. And Lois Lane basically starts speaking with him. Now, historically speaking, Lois Lane and Superman were the 1-2 punch of romantic couples in comics. They were the original. They were the original power couple, and no other power couple will ever be on par, on the same level as like Superman and Lois Lane, right? I mean, that's just the way it is in comics. They stand above all else. And so it's one of those things where Tom Taylor kind of toys with this idea of there potentially being like a Superman Lois Lane type power couple here. But of course, we don't necessarily get that. Instead, a lot of it's general discussion, and a lot of it's really her just saying, you were sad because, you know, Queen Hippolyta has a magical sword, so obviously you're weak to magic. And that's kind of the answer that we get, which makes sense, right? Superman does have an inherent weakness to magic. It's not just Tom Taylor pulling it out of his ass and then just kind of rolling with it. But one of the things that Lois Lane says here is she's like, look, there's got to be something bigger going on. And Superman's just kind of like, I mean, it seems like there is, right? It really seems like there is. Now, lest we forget, remember his attack on Batman. So what it looks like is Superman's playing everybody for a fool, right? He's literally like, he literally has every intention to conquer the world. And he's just kind of pitting everybody maybe against themselves, but he's essentially duping everyone. And so Lois really shows her hand here. And it's just kind of like, I mean, we've been giving information to Queen Hippolyta, we've been telling her what's going on, but she's hell-bent on this idea that it really was Supergirl who killed the son of Jefferson Pierce, and seemingly killed Jefferson Pierce as well. But the thing about this is, it feels like something else is going on here. That there's some kind of invisible strings that are pulling at everything, right? There's something bigger happening, and I can't quite figure out what it is. And the response to Superman is, I feel the exact same way. Take me to Queen Hippolyta, we can prevent this war from happening. And that's when Lois Lane says, no, you can't. It's not possible for you to stop this war from happening. Queen Hippolyta and the Amazons, they're already sailing for the lands of El. The war is about to begin. With that being said, guys, we're gonna bring this to an end. I love this story so far. It's so good because it's so unique. I absolutely love it. But thank you all for watching. Don't forget to put your opinion down on the question at the beginning of the video, and I will catch you all later. Peace.